Okay, so this is my second book in my Life Beyond Silence series. Um, the first book was Not a Victim, a Survivor, Life Beyond Domestic Violence and Rape. It's available on Amazon in ebook form, and it's also available in um, paperback. My second book in the series is not up on Amazon as of yet, but I am reading from it in my podcast called Losing Touch with Reality, and it's my second book in the series. Um, I started the podcast on the book. Um, Even the first book, I started it because I thought that anybody that was going through one hardship after another like I did. I mean, my life has been such a roller coaster ride. It's had its ups and downs. I have to admit, the downs were like the way a roller coaster just suddenly drops out from underneath you. It was like my life just drops out from underneath me. And I did that multiple times throughout my life. I've said it once, I'll say it again. I made a lot of mistakes. A lot of mistakes that I wish I could take back, but unfortunately you can't. You can't take them back. Once you've made a mistake in your life, you have to accept it, you know. And over the years, because quite, it's been quite a lot of years since I wrote the series, but over the years I have not only mellowed out, but I have accepted the mistakes I made, and I've made peace with them, even if nobody else gave me any kind of break, I guess you would say. You know, everybody judges people. That's the thing. And over all the years, for whatever reason, they picked a reason, I'm sure, but they judged me and they just labeled me that I was a fuck up. You know, I literally just screwed up so many times. Nobody, you know, gave me a real second chance. And I get it. I get it. I'm not blaming anybody. Anybody. All of the mistakes were my own. And if I could take them back, I would. If cutting off my arms would erase some of the mistakes, I would. Because I've lived with so much heartache over the years for things that I did that people just labeled me a fuck up. And I get it. You know, I did. I made a lot of mistakes. But I've always believed that in time people would forgive me. You know, especially now. I'm older and I don't probably have that much longer to live, actually. And I just feel like, okay, I wasn't the best mom. I get it. I made a lot of mistakes with different men. I get it. I ended up at the end of my last book leaving my oldest daughter to go be with Phil, which was a huge mistake. I get it. I just was at my end of my rope. I literally didn't have a good mindset at that time. I'm not blaming anyone for that. I'm just saying that I wasn't in a good frame of mind, and I made a huge mistake that I wish I could take back, but I can't. But I thought in my head, I truly thought, going to Louisiana, which is where this book, Losing Touch with Reality, starts, is once I left my oldest daughter and went to Louisiana to be with Phil with my 3 other children. I honestly had it in my heart it was better for my son. And you can judge that however you want to judge it. And once I got there, just like I said in the last episode, or the first episode of this podcast, Losing Touch with Reality, just like I said in the first episode, I literally thought I was doing the right thing for my son. He was little. He deserved to be with his dad if he could. And I still cared greatly for his dad. And I thought, if I can save our life together, maybe somehow it'll balance out. I always thought over time my oldest would get older and she wouldn't be under any restrictions to see me. And wherever I was, whether I was with Phil or not, I honestly thought by the time she got to be, because I left her when she was 12, and I thought by the time she gets to be like 17, she can do what she wants, or even 18. And if I'm with Phil or if I'm not with Phil, she'll still call me mom, and she'll still come to see me because she knows I'm her mom. I really, truly believed that with all my heart. And I knew she would stay in touch with my middle daughter because they were really close. And I was hoping, of course, she would stay in touch with my youngest daughter and my son and me. And I didn't know if Phil would be in the picture. Honestly, I didn't know. But I was trying to make the best of the situation. And once I got to Louisiana, just like I said in the first episode, it was traumatic. I knew I made a big mistake. I knew it from the moment I stepped into the trailer. But I was crying and I was begging God to forgive me. And I prayed that she would forgive me and that she would understand. She told me, not that I should have listened to her, but she told me it'll be okay. And I just thought it would. But once I got down there and started crying, yes, Phil got on his knees and he said, I'll pack everything back up and I'll drive you back to Kentucky. But I told him, no, you can't. I did something that can't be erased. No matter if I was to turn around and go back right now, I knew my mother would never give her back. I knew my ex, who probably was already taking her from my mother, would never give her back. I knew the judge would never give her back. And I was I was struggling, but I knew that there was no turning back. And I had 3 other kids to think about. And I knew I had to get myself together. And I had to get up and do everything I could to make their lives, my middle daughter, my youngest daughter, and my son, as normal as possible. So, like I said in the first episode, I don't remember a lot about that time. I just don't. Right when I got to Louisiana, I remember getting there. I remember going to his family's that very first evening and having a meal and then coming back home. And I remember decorating the trailer. I remember trying to make it look as normal of a life as possible for my 3 children that I had with me. And I remember getting up every day, and we were barely making it from paycheck to paycheck, but we were okay. We would manage. I still had my child support coming in from my youngest daughter, and Phil was working, and we would manage. And my mother has always talked to me over the years. We talk on the phone. We talked then. She wanted, of course, to know that my other kids were okay, especially my second daughter, who she was really close to. And we would talk on the phone. And she would tell me, that Phil had done these terrible things, and she couldn't believe I left my daughter, but she just kind of she would tell me bits and pieces. Like, I remember after Matt took my first daughter, I remember her saying that it wasn't what he had always said. He was having her, she was supposed to do her own laundry, which at 12 years old, they probably showed her how, but she had never done laundry. And that she had chores, and that her room was extremely cold in the winter, or I don't know, maybe just cold, period. And they said that even in the summertime it was the opposite. It was too hot. I don't really know what they said, to be honest. I just know she would filter things to me, and in a way it was to make me feel just how bad of a mistake I had done. Just how horrific it was, the mistake I had done. But at first, I was just grateful that she was telling me things and talking to me and staying in touch. I knew she wasn't necessarily staying in touch because of me. She was just staying in touch, I guess, to just know what was going on. But, I can remember her talking to my middle daughter, who was with me, and I was truly worried, especially during that first little bit, that my mother would convince my middle daughter to come back to Kentucky. That, maybe she would somehow set up something so that my middle daughter would want to go back for a visit. And I couldn't say no. I mean, she deserved to see her sister. But I was scared to death. I remember being scared to death that the mistake I made would cost me both of my older children, because my mother would pull in my second one. And I even remember my dad asking for my daughter to come and see him. And I let her because, of course, she wanted to go on a trip. So I put her on a plane and let her go to Las Vegas, where my dad lives. And my stepmom, they live in Las Vegas. And at the time they were living two places, Las Vegas and Kentucky. But she went to Las Vegas for a small trip, like a week. And I was scared that somehow my dad would end up grabbing her for my mom and she would never return. But she did. She returned. My dad returned her. And I just was scared the whole time. But my second daughter, bless her heart, like I said, I don't like to say names in the podcast because I don't want to. They're all grown now, and I don't want to interrupt my children's lives any more than I already have with the books, But I worried greatly, and my middle daughter was very I guess she was comforting to me. She would tell me it's going to be okay, that she loved me, and that she would come back, and she did. And I have to admit, my middle daughter really held it together. She held it together for the youngest two. She held it together for me. And you got to think, at the time that all this is happening, she's only 10. But she was like 10 going on 16. And it was 1993. And my mother told me on a phone call that my second husband, Walker, the one that hurt me so severely and was abusive and a drug addict and an alcoholic, she called me and told me that he had shot himself and that he was dead. And I don't remember much, of course, but I remember freezing, just sitting down at the kitchen table, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I don't really know what to say." If you can hear fireworks in the background, today is July 4th. And in my neighborhood, they are shooting off fireworks, of course. But I remember sitting at the kitchen table, and I remember just being frozen at that moment, not knowing what I was feeling. I wanted to cry and I wanted to feel something. But in my heart, I was like, it was like something I knew was eventually going to happen to him. I said, was he drunk? Was he on drugs at the time? Maybe it wasn't a suicide. Maybe he was just out of his mind. And because my mother said something about he supposedly was cleaning guns. And I could kind of see it in my mind that he was doing that, and it did go off, but he didn't necessarily mean to kill himself. And she said that he's the one that called 911, that he lived long enough to get to the hospital. And for my stepkids, the ones that I had partially, when I was with him, partially had, because his kids lived with his mom, but they were like my own, you know. Especially like in the first book, I talked about how Ellen was there when, thankfully, was there when a lot of things happened, especially when he shot the gun off. Which hopefully you're listening to my first podcast with my first book, Not a Victim, a Survivor. But I just kept thinking, you know, I don't think he meant to shoot himself. He called 911. He probably was drunk. It went off, which I couldn't even imagine how that must be, that you shoot yourself but you're still alive. Of course you would call 911 because you would realize you need help. And thankfully, maybe he didn't have too much pain. He didn't live long, but he lived long enough to get to the hospital. And for my stepdaughter, the one that was his daughter, to actually get to the hospital. I don't know if she was there to say goodbye or if she didn't make it. I don't know. I was in Louisiana when it happened. But I remember being frozen and not knowing what to really say to my mother. She said, "Are you okay?" And I just remember thinking, yeah, I'm okay. I want to know what happened. And all she could tell me is he called 911 and he made it to the hospital. And even after all these years, it would be nice to see him in heaven and to know what happened. And I do believe he's in heaven. He was a good guy. He was a good guy, and he had a large family, and he was just, had a lot of demons. He was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he had a lot of demons. But I do believe when you die, you don't have pain. And I just think maybe there's a chance I could see him in heaven. And I know he loved me. I know he did. We kind of stayed in touch a little bit, and not like closeness or anything, but he did call me when I was in Germany. And I know he loved my middle daughter. He's the one that gave her his name. He adopted her after we got married because, well, number one, we got married, but number two, he was the only dad that she would ever really know. So he did adopt her, and I know he loved her, and I know he loved me, and I loved him, and we could have had a great life. But I couldn't live like that. Nobody in domestic violence situations can live like that. And I truly believe if I had stayed, he would have killed me. I don't think he would have ever killed the kids, but I don't think he would have. But I think he would have killed me, like if I had been there and he was like out of his mind, which I kind of thought he had to be like messed up when he shot himself. If I had been there, he might have shot me and him. He might have been seeing things and waving a gun around. I don't know. I don't know what happened, but I would really like to know exactly what happened. Like I said, I'm sorry for the fireworks. There's nothing I can do. But I remember sitting down at the table and being just frozen with the news. And after he passed, my mother started calling me, telling me the Social Security office was trying to get a hold of me. And I said, why? You know, what for? And she said, well, you just got to call them. They're really trying to get a hold of you. And here's the number or whatever. I don't know how I ended up on the phone with this woman, but this woman called me and she said from the Social Security office that when he died, that his benefits for Social Security would be divided amongst his heirs. And my daughter, because she was adopted, was his daughter and would get so much a month, kind of like child support, basically, because I was technically divorced and not married. So, you know, there would be money that would come in until, I think hers lasted until she was 18, and I got a portion until she was like 16, I think, because I was her caretaker, her parent. Anyway, I got the news on the phone, and it really helped our family live because we were so broke and we were trying desperately to stay above water. So the news that we were going to get his benefits helped us greatly. Some people might say that was terrible, you know, for us to somehow benefit, but it benefited my daughter because it helped me make sure when she got 16 that she had a car. It helped me make sure that she had things that she needed. It helped me put a roof over her head. It helped me, you know, get her school supplies, things like that. It was just basically like child support, or at least that's the way I thought of it. And it's not like I sought them out. They sought me out to make sure that she was given the money to support her. That's what they told me, you know. And I I don't think we would have. We had 3 children that we were taking care of, and I tried to work as much as I could doing auditing. I didn't do nursing in Louisiana. I was pretty much a stay-at-home mom, but I did do some auditing with the auditing firm that I was with. They're nationwide, so I did get a hold of them and do a little bit. But um, we lived in this huge trailer park, and my kids basically flourished. Um, my middle daughter, like I said, found friends right off the bat, and my little girl, my littlest one, she also found a little small group of friends, and they went to a small rural school system that was very good. It was a very good school system. And we were in Lake Charles, Louisiana, but they went to a little school system that was like a suburb of Lake Charles. And we had our own little community. And I was friends with the mother of my middle daughter's friends. And we, like I said, flourished. We had a haunted house at Halloween that Phil worked on quite a bit for the neighborhood kids, and we all enjoyed taking part in it. There was a community pool at our trailer park, and every summer we would be there playing in the pool, and just it was it was good. I have good memories, and thankfully my kids have good memories. I don't know that my son remembers that much because he was very young, but there were plenty of things to do, and we did have family there because of Phil. And Phil was a truck driver, delivery truck driver, and we just have basically good memories of Louisiana. Um, we went back to Kentucky on a visit. I drove the kids and we went back, but it was not all great. My mother and me got into it. Of course, that doesn't surprise anybody, I'm sure. And I remember my mother was like, you were supposed to stay a week, you're going to stay a week, because we got into it. And I was like, we'll just go home early. And she's like, no, you're not going to go home until you're supposed to go home. It was totally dysfunctional that I was into it with my mother like I was still a kid. And I get it. I was upset. I was wanting to leave. I get it that my mother, it was her house and her rules, and she treated me just like I was still a teenager, and I didn't go home until she gave me back my car keys. But I remember being, again, totally upset at how screwed up my life was. You know, I've always wanted my family to just let go of the mistakes I've made and just be like what I thought other people are, just normal. Like you you talk normal, you don't start fights, you might have an argument, but you realize that, like with my kids, I argue with my kids sometimes, and sometimes it's not the best of times, but they're grown. I can't tell them what to do. I know that because that's the way I wanted to live. You know, it's my decision, it's their decision. If I get into an argument with them and I try to like say something and they don't like it and they tell me no, shut up, whatever, then I accept that. They're grown. I can't tell them what to do. I can give them advice and I can say, I wouldn't do that or this or whatever, but I can't make them do anything. But that wasn't my situation, especially back then. My situation is every time I screwed up, every time I made a move, if my family wanted to say something, they would say something. And they would say it in a way like, you have no choice. You have screwed up your life. I'm telling you what to do. And if you go against it, which is probably what you're going to do because you're a fuck up. I mean, literally, that's kind of just the gist of my whole existence with my family. Is every move I made was another mark against me. And I'm not saying that that's not right. I made a lot of mistakes. And I should have listened a lot of times. I get that. But you can't take it back. You can't go back and say, I made a mistake. Just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, my mind is so jumbled. I get days mixed up now, but just yesterday, I was talking to my dad. And this will come later on, but my dad was talking to me about money. And he was just telling me that, remember when I told you to buy that house, or to buy a house, or to buy a condo, or to do this, or to do that? And I said, yeah. And he said, if you had done this, you would have had property that would have been worth more now because of inflation, and you would have not been in the situation you are now. And I know this is jumping forward, I'm sorry, but I just had to make this comparison. And even after all these years, what he wanted, and he even said it after I said it, he wanted me to say, yeah, you're right. If I could have gone back, I would have, could have, should have done that when you told me to do that. And he said, that's all I wanted. I just wanted to hear you say that I was right and that you should have bought that condo or whatever. And after all these years, him saying that just kind of fits in this situation when I'm talking about then. That's what my family always wants. They want me to say, you're right. I should have done that. And I'm sorry. And at the time, back then, what my mom wanted, I don't even remember what the fight was about, but I'm sure it had to do with my oldest. But there I was, had traveled from Louisiana to Kentucky, had not only my 3 kids, but it had an extra kid that I brought that was my middle daughter's friend. And I had all these children in a van up there to see not only my mother, but I also got to see my oldest daughter. And we had pictures and memories, and my kids had a good time visiting. There was the 4-wheeler and water activities, and it was great for them to all get together. But for me, no, it wasn't. You know, my daughter hardly spoke to me. My mother was my mother. She was judgmental. She was outspoken. She was difficult. And I was the opposition. I was the screw up. But I was there. And I didn't try to push my oldest daughter to have any kind of real contact with me. I just let her be with her siblings. And I just remember crying and just accepting that I was at least in the same room, or at least in her presence. You know, looking back all those years, back to like 1993, 94, that time in my life, I just kind of accepted I had made a mistake. I was to blame. She didn't want to speak to me. And my mother was very judgmental. So, of course, I should just accept it and back away, because I don't want to start anything that would make it worse. And yet, everywhere I turned, I did start a fight. Like, there was fights everywhere I turned. Arguments. Arguments. And more arguments. And then the day came where she gave me back my car keys, and we said our goodbyes, and we drove back to Louisiana. And my kids were happy that they got to see their oldest sibling, and I was happy that at least I was in her presence. And that I made the trip. But I knew that my mother controlled what my oldest daughter was hearing. Kind of like, I guess kind of like, or at least in my mind, I have accepted that my oldest daughter was told right off the bat that I chose a man over her, and that I was not a worthy mother, that I was a fuck up, that everywhere and everything that I had done was a mistake, and one that I had made so gravely that I could never be forgiven for. And all these years, that was driven into her. Like, I won't say brainwashing, but she was told I was not worthy of forgiveness. That I had made this huge mistake. I'm sorry about the fireworks. It's 4th of July and I'm doing a podcast. I'm sorry. But I wanted to get this done for the listeners. But I'm going to leave it here because I do talk a lot. I'm sorry, but I just am going to leave it here for the night. And we will come back to this in the next episode anyway. So, thank you for listening. Please listen. Continue to listen to my podcast. Please continue to send any comments or questions you have, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.